All right, let's continue with our conversation around freedom of expression and media freedom. The case of former President Jacob Zuma, of course, against journalist Karyn Maughan has highlighted the plight of journalists being bullied into silence by powerful political persons. But many people who are outspoken, including whistleblowers even, have been silenced, especially when they speak out against corruption and wrongdoing in government. One example of this is the case of Babita Deokaran, who was murdered for exposing corruption at the Gauteng Health Department. And we still have Professor Anton Harber from the Campaign for Freedom of Expression and Media Monitoring Africa's Head of Policy. That is Thandi Smith. Apologies for that. I almost called you Thandi Mudise. I guess I speak about politicians so often, sometimes I confuse it. So before the break, we were talking about, and I was admitting that sometimes I am that despondent South African, because I'm on the front row seat of all the news that comes in about our country, that every time I'm just in shock, and sometimes I don't understand why I'm in shock. But of course, Prof, I was even saying that sometimes, though, at least you get a positive feeling when you find courts actually rule in a positive way. We spoke about Amapungani and the Morty Files, judgment that you don't understand. I don't understand. I think a lot of people don't. But there was another judgment having to do with the investigative group, and that is the SARS and the access to President Jacob Zuma's records. Yeah. That was a positive.
No, it's true. We've had both positive and negative from our judiciary. That's absolutely true. The SARS case was a very important and very positive one, that puts us ahead internationally. And that was from the Constitutional Court as well, so it's a final ruling. Yeah. Some of the ones we're criticizing now are subject to appeal, and hopefully that will help sort out where mistakes have been made.
But also, Thandi, when it comes to the appeals, just like the Prof is saying, the former president, with this particular case having to do with Karyn Maughan, has indicated that he would appeal that decision. So that he can try and continue with his nulla prosecu attempt. This is yet another Stalingrad, right? Which is what the court says in so many times in its judgment is what they're trying to stop.
It is. It is exactly. And I think that anyone who understands the judgment would agree that it would be ludicrous for the former president to appeal the judgment. I think it's such as we were saying, a well-written, presented judgment, touching on all the issues at hand, that to appeal that, I think would just be further attempts at trying to position, whether it's a position of power, intimidation, stifling media, threatening media, a show of power, or attempts at a show of power. My limited detailed legal knowledge, I don't think that it warrants an appeal.
But also, at the same time, some of these cases, Thandi, do teach us a few lessons, right? As we go through these cases, some of them it's our first time that we get to actually speak about something like this. And it actually also lets us have very important conversations about our constitution, what our legal rights are, and if some acts need to change slightly.
No, it's a really good point to bring up. Although the process and the legal process itself, bringing the case forward, is an intimidation, threat to media freedom. Yeah. Like you rightly say, what we can learn from it, and especially in a judgment like this, when it touches on issues like the SLAPP suit, which is what we as amicus to the case pressed on and highlighted, the strategic litigation against public participation. So there are a lot of things that we can learn from it. So I completely agree with that statement.
I mean, I'd go further and hope that what the judge has said in this court has opened the door a crack wider to legislation to stop what we call SLAPP suits. And SLAPP suits are suits that are aimed not at justice, but are aimed at silencing someone, at stopping them speaking out against a corporate or state interest.
Which is what the Morty company actually did, Prof. And the judge, the original judge, let them do it for a little bit, of course. But
we think there's now a call for legislation that deals with SLAPP cases and stops them happening.
Yes, especially so often with no reason sometimes. But, you know, then there would be people who say, but we have a constitution that allows people to be able to use the law to keep fighting their battles.
No, and that must continue.
Yes.
But if it's frivolous and if it's intended only to silence someone, then there should be a hearing at the beginning of the case to say, is this a SLAPP case? If it's not, proceed. If it is, chuck it out before it uses up the time of the court.
Absolutely, and I agree. And also I think what's important with what we've seen in cases that have to do with media, either individual journalists or media houses as a whole in recent years, is that we have a constitution that's working. It's growing at least, and it's working, and we're having those discussions, and laws are changing, bills are coming in so that the public can talk about them. But also importantly as well is that it's not only political parties that we go after, for lack of a better word, as people would say, media goes after political parties. The Motic is it's a private company, and this shows the relationship between business and government, where there's the corrupter and the corruptee. And it's our job to make you see that there's an issue.
And it shows that elements of the corporate world can be enemies of press freedom as well.
Yeah.
Look, you know, we have to say, South Africa this year was 25th in the world in media freedom on the global index out of 180 countries, 10 places better than last year.
Yeah.
And that was brilliant. That was excellent. But the events of recent weeks tell us we have to be vigilant. There are warning signs, particularly in the build-up to an election, that says we have to defend that freedom, that space, vigilantly.
I have to ask you, I've always thought about this a little bit. Coalition governance is something that has been a very big topic as well. And these are political heads of different parties coming together to get the power of a certain area or the country as a whole. Good luck to us if we do find ourselves in a national coalition situation. Is that also a danger for media, and like Prof says something that we should look out for? Because if different political parties, despite the fact that our law does work, our constitution does work, the be careful warning that we're getting from Prof should probably also go all the way there, because if political parties are on the same side and we find that there's something happening in dealings in, for instance, municipal government where there's multiple parties coming together, you know, it could also put a danger to media freedom and freedom of expression.
Well, I think that the media is going to have a very difficult job over the next couple of months in the lead up to election, regardless of coalition politics and coalition governance. I think that the sort of state of politics that we find ourselves in, as well as the electoral amendment bill coming in and bringing in the whole independent candidate contesting national elections. I think that we're seeing a state of politics that is very confusing for the ordinary person.
Yeah.
And it's confusing for media to have to grapple with how these structures are working and this rise of coalition governments. I struggle to understand the politics behind coalition governments and coalition politics. But it's exactly for that reason that the role of the media over the next year, the next couple of months, is even more important. Because for the voting public to understand what's going on, how to vote, and to make an informed decision about who to vote for, that you need to understand our political system. And so with all the challenges, with all the attempts at stifling media, at harassing journalists, it's almost equally important that media rise to the role and responsibility of reporting in the lead up to elections.
And I mean, Prof, also it brings in how important our role of making sure that people are held to account is, especially if, I'll give you an example. In the city of Johannesburg, we have a mayor that has run away from speaking to the media since his inception as mayor. And at some point, he had his maiden state of the city address. The media waited because they had requests. And this time we thought, okay, at least this time he'll be able to speak to us. Instead, he sent his MMCs, his executive, to answer. And his excuse is, well, whatever I said, I have different MMCs in different departments to answer questions if you have a question about a certain department. But then it's also this growing trend of government officials refusing to come to media interviews to be held accountable. And now you're facing all these MMCs from different political parties. And what is this about, this growing trend?
I think it's a growing hostility towards the media in some circles. That's very worrying. And let me tell you, it starts at the top. How many interviews has President Ramaphosa given since he came into office?
Absolutely.
I think you should run a little thing on your screen in the corner. Days since our last interview.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea.
Because the president being subjected to questioning from the media who are doing it on behalf of citizens is a very important part of accountability and openness. And the fact that he doesn't do it, and does it in fact much less than his predecessors, is a very worrying sign.
And instead he calls press conferences where he speaks alone and we can't ask questions.
Just to add to that, I also think that given the state of our city as well, of Johannesburg, and the recent sort of politics that have led us to the point that we're at, it's a sidestepping around accountability. You know, our current mayor, as with I think the immediate former mayor, I'm losing track of how many changes there have been.
We've had about 8.
But our former mayor, you know, had a complete crisis with media when he was interviewed by Sakina on SABC and asked some really hard-hitting questions and completely fumbled. And then there was backlash about that interview. And so I think it's a complete avoidance of being in those positions of responsibility, but not holding themselves accountable to actually engaging with the media. And I think that's, I agree, an incredibly dangerous precedent to be setting, especially in the time that we're in.
I completely agree. And for me, I used to think coalition governments would work better because I thought everybody would be fighting to be seen as working the best. And then the next time we go for elections, everybody would have been campaigning the entire 5 years. But instead, you're still trading horses and people are just trying to get into positions like we've seen in the city of Joburg. Thank you very much to the both of you for your time, Professor Anton Harber and Thandi Smith. Thank you very much for your time. Professor Harber is from Freedom of Expression and Thandi is from Media Monitoring Africa.